to my bid.
What's that?
Find a pen. Oh, good.
You did? That's awesome.
Oh, sorry, I didn't even.
Is that maple?
Yes.
Couple coats of lacquer and glass.
Like that, but I can back you up. It's
Real weird. You know, it's like it's hard to. It's dim. It's like an expensive restaurant. Right. The light in here is like when you go to an expensive restaurant and have glasses of wine, and you're eating dinner and it's all low. That's what the light in here is like.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Don't you think? It's very romantic. It's very romantic.
Hey. Yeah. So where in the hell were you?
Yeah.
Right?
I guess. Yeah. I was hoping to get here earlier, but
Barely. only because
should
James
say
was on Zoom.
Here's your snow melting all the way down at the bottom of the hill.
No, not really. My icicles are still hanging.
I know.
You don't go out there and whack them off.
I don't dare to whack them off. I might take the
The
face
brunt
off.
of it.
Oh, yeah.
But it's curious. On one side, all the icicles are gone. On the other side, they're still there.
Is it the sun? The way the sun comes out? Yeah. Yeah, that would be my guess. It's more.
Oh, the joys of being.
Right. I'm
A little
bit
midway.
over
We're
winter.
midway, though.
That's why we live here.
We just came past midway.
Right.
But the days are getting longer.
Yeah.
They are. Isn't that nice?
Yes.
Isn't it? It's like the sun is still shining at,
Well, we've gained an hour, you know,
yeah, yeah,
since December.
right. But today was beautiful. It wasn't windy. It was a beautiful day.
At 6 o'clock, we'll call the meeting to order. We're here to talk about the short-term rental. Start off by reading the changes, and going over the changes.
Is there a handout here?
Right outside the door, Rip. It's the same one you had in your zoning meeting.
Changes would be changes in the zoning that are proposed to make short-term rentals a conditional use. And that way, each STR would have to go through a conditional use permit. And have conditions put on it that are appropriate for each individual one. On the handouts here, the definition of short-term rental is the state's definition. It means a furnished house, condominium, or other dwelling, room, or self-contained dwelling unit rented to transient, traveling, or vacationing public for a period of fewer than 30 consecutive days, and and for more than, not more, for more than 14 days per calendar year. So, open it up to comments.
Just a question, Mr. Chairman. Has the board decided whether to require all the existing STRs to get permits?
We would require that.
Well, there are two ways of dealing with it. You can classify them as an unpermitted prior use, which doesn't require that they have get a permit since they were established before the ordinance, or you can require that every existing STR gets a permit, a conditional use permit. There are two ways of doing that. So that's the question. Has the board decided that all of the SDRs will require a permit, a conditional use permit?
Yes. You decide that?
That's basically the question.
Yes.
Yeah, he
Yes,
answered
he
yes.
answered yes.
He answered
Yes.
yes.
The board has decided that?
Yes.
Yeah, 120-day grace period. Get the permit.
Well, that'll be part of the question then.
Yeah, so there would be a 120-day grace period for anyone considered pre-existing,
I understand.
but that everybody new and old would all be under that same umbrella, for fairness.
So anything existing or new would require a conditional use permit?
Correct, but the
Yes.
existing ones would have a grace period
Yes.
to get
I
theirs
see.
done.
Oh, that's,
Because that seems fair,
yeah.
you know, that's what we,
You don't really have any way to regulate it, I mean, enforce it, unless you take away the conditional use.
Well, enforcement is gonna be a problem.
Yeah,
Most of the time, when we have a conditional use permit process, people will adhere to what the process is. But there may be people who say, I'm not getting a permit, you're not, those are the ones that you have an enforcement problem.
yeah.
Well, we have an enforcement problem right now, because
Well, yeah, we have.
short-term rentals are not a conditional use.
Correct.
So everybody with one now is breaking the zoning.
Well, not really, because that is not now a requirement. What you're establishing is a future requirement after it's been adopted.
But we have conditional uses right now.
Yes.
Short-term rentals
It's
do not
part-
fall under.
It's not part of
Well,
the list.
It's not allowed
Exactly. So
conditional
it's-
use now.
Well, yeah.
It is not now an allowed conditional use. So until something is passed that allows it to be a conditional use, they are in violation of the existing zoning regulations. Is there going to be opportunity to ask questions?
that would be now.
Yeah, right,
That's
Okay.
just
go ahead,
for
Ray.
purpose of the public hearing.
Yeah. Yeah,
Go
so,
ahead, Ray.
I have a few questions. One, do we have a count of how many unhosted short-term rentals presently exist in the town? And if we do, how is that determined?
We do not, because we don't have it under conditional use, so therefore there's no way of knowing exactly how many
Well,
there are.
In Chester, they hired someone to compute that number. And until they actually develop their ordinances, if you can follow this along in the Chester Telegraph, they have a moratorium on new short-term rentals. I take it that we have, not only do we not know how many we have, but we're going to have no limitation as to how many are added?
No, we're not.
No,
We are actually bringing this to the town to vote upon. Do they want this as conditional use? We are
it's very
bringing
hard
this,
to, that's like asking, do I want a car? But I don't know what the price of it is, I don't know what the model of it is, and I don't know what the condition is. You know, it's to vote to whether we're going to have more or not without knowing what the conditions are, that's buying a pig in a poke.
I don't think that the vote has anything to do with whether there would be more or a moratorium on them. The vote would simply be that if people were gonna have short-term rentals in Andover, they would have to be under conditional use.
Yeah, but
Because it would give us a way,
But when it comes to the vote, I might be willing to vote if it was a limited number and I knew what the conditions were. But if I don't know what the conditions are, I can't vote.
the one condition would be what Robin said, which is all short-term rentals would be under that conditional use. Anyone who was pre-existing would have to get right with that. They'd have 120 days to do that. We're thinking that one of the thoughts about this is, at least in this way, we would be able to get more information about the people, the places, and who has them, right? This is a legal way for us to do it.
You can get that information without approving them. You can get a survey, you can get firm, you can come up with an inventory without having to make them legal first. That's like that's like saying I need to make marijuana farms legal in order to know how many I have.
well,
That doesn't make any
we
sense.
haven't, but to us, we have thought along the lines of, and I say we, I'll say I, that it is not my place to tell people whether they can or cannot make their home into a short-term rental. That is not my place to say that. My place is to understand whether they're out there for the public, but personally to tell someone what they can and cannot do with their property.
Do you see any balance between the interests of the owners of these properties versus the community at large?
That is a concern, but at this point, I personally don't feel like it's something I want to step out and say, okay, I'm going to say we can only do this many, or that I'm going to tell this person, okay, you can have one, but you can't. I'm not willing to.
The other thing
do
is
that right now.
to your point, is that you have all of these pre-existing short-term rentals, which, you're right, we don't know exact numbers, although I'm sure we could find out. But here's the thing, is,
It's between 25 and 30.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Right.
Thank you for that. I knew you had that, but I didn't want to put you on the spot. I knew you knew, which is why my hand was pointing in your direction without saying your name.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
It's between 25 and 30.
And how is that determined?
Basically, by looking at Airbnb and...
Well, I found about 25 or 30 about 2 years ago.
Yeah, and some of them come and some of them go. And
Right, a lot of property is sold, but the point is this. If there are 20, say there are 20 pre-existing short-term rentals right now, and then we say as a town, and I think a lot of towns, and we've looked into this a little bit, there are a lot of towns across Vermont that are getting into some deep legal water with some of these decisions. Andover does not have the kind of money or, we don't have the kind of money that would let us get into a long legal battle with someone who said, wait, there's there's all of these pre-existing short-term rentals. I just bought this house and now you're telling me that it's disallowed by the select board or the town of Andover? That's not
All the more
legal.
reason to have a moratorium on new ones.
Can't have the moratorium, that's what I'm saying. That comes up as not legal. It really does, you can't.
Chester is acting illegally.
I'm not saying that Chester is acting illegally. I'm saying that in Andover, we're trying to be very cognizant of keeping ourselves out of that big pool of difficulty, because we don't have the money.
I have another question. What duty, if any, do we have to the people who would come and, transient people who would come and rent these properties, that these properties are safe?
Well, that would fall under the state regs
Yeah.
of a
We
short-term
have
rental.
we have no duty to.
It would fall
inspect
under the
these
state
properties?
regs of what a short-term rental is required to do. There are state regulations.
What about requiring them to carry adequate liability insurance?
That would probably come under state regs. I'd have to read about the liability
Joe,
insurance
you might know the
on
answer to
but-
that.
there are any number of ways people have, and towns have approached that. Some towns have, by adopting ordinances, specified very specific conditions under which these things would operate.
Now, if a,
Ray, Joe isn't done.
if,
Joe wasn't
Ray,
done
Joe isn't
speaking.
done.
if a short.
Joe wasn't done.
Joe wasn't done speaking.
Never mind.
No, I'd like to hear what you're gonna say, though.
There are, as I said, many towns have different approaches, and by saying that they have an ordinance that specifically says a short-term rental will be doing this. There are very specific ways of towns doing very specific things and having very specific requirements. By adopting the conditional use approach. One thing that I haven't heard the board discuss is the difference between adopting an ordinance which gives a permit to the owner when you have a conditional use permit issued. It goes with the land. It becomes a permanent attachment to the land. It does not at any time expire. So that may be something you need to think about and make a decision about. But the only thing is, as I said, when you do a very simple requirement that says you have to have a conditional use permit, the conditional use permit process is outlined in our zoning regulations.
Right.
There are requirements, and the board can reasonably attach other requirements that are not specifically mentioned. But they have to be consistent, they have to be equal to all of the
Fair,
applicants.
right.
So, but that's basically it.
Okay.
I have a question. You haven't written any laws yet, right?
I've learned an ordinance.
Yeah, but you're working on this. So I don't, the way the society is today, you have to write it in the law that whoever's running this room, this time for people to stay there, should be like a motel. They have to record their number, their name and everything, vet them somehow with a license number to their vehicle, and keep a record of it. So, and they have to keep it, not us. So if we have a problem, you could go to the people and get this information. We have a right to know who's coming and going in this town. And not that the town has to do it, the people who you give the permit to do this have to do it, and you can come back and check it. It's part of the, so if something goes wrong in town, you can, the police and anybody can track back who was there when.
So that is, we aren't writing any ordinances with this. We are bringing this to the public
Well,
to
the future,
decide whether we should put, well, my opinion on that is that are we going to do the same thing with everyone who moves in? And are we also going to do the same thing with the campground?
because this is leading to what's gonna happen in the state. This guy's got a motel, now they get illegal people, by this, putting them in these places, and you have no control of it. So if you're gonna let people in here, you're gonna protect the people in this town and not allow the state to come in and say, you have to rent this room to these illegal people.
What do you mean by illegal people? But no,
There's
I'm
thousands of them coming across the border from Canada. There's people that don't belong in this country, they're illegal.
So you're requesting, you're asking us to do what about that?
Make it illegal for the state to come in and make you, say you own one, and say you gotta put these 5 people in your house until we decide to put them someplace else. This is going on, this is happening all over the country. Don't you understand, don't you see what's happening all over the country?
Yes, but I
Right in
don't
this, right
think,
in little Vermont, they're stuffing them in motels all over the place.
I don't think that at this moment, at this juncture, we're talking about short-term rentals as we are the town and how we're dealing with that. I think if someone owns a home and they live in Connecticut and they have a short-term rental here, if the government is, they would have to get a hold of them, not us.
Well, they're gonna come up and say, you have to take these people in.
I don't foresee that happening.
Yeah, right, come on.
What Hank is talking
But I
about
also don't,
is that there are impacts on the community associated with short-term rentals that have to be taken into account, that we are hosting people and that we may have people who are undesirable coming in. There's no control whatsoever.
what is your definition as undesirable?
My definition of undesirable is people who are disruptive to the community.
And what is that to you? What does
Disruptive
that
to the
look like?
community is noise, litter, excessive numbers.
Illegal aliens.
It could include people who are illegal for a number of reasons. I'm not just saying aliens, but the point is that we have, if we are going to authorize, these are not homes. If you haven't, and I'm talking about unhosted, because if you're talking about the campground has management present.
It also has.
They see what's going on. They have some regulation if people are getting out of line. I'm talking about where there's no one present. And these people come up, and a lot of them are nice people, but they're not familiar with the area. They're not familiar with the area. They're used to, they call 911, the police are there within 5 minutes, or an ambulance is there within 5 to 10 minutes. We don't have that here. We have, if you call 911 here, we have no local police. We have a constable who mainly is involved with animal control. We have a rescue squad that may or may not show up in an hour. If someone comes up here from New York City or Boston and has a stroke, and they call 911, if they can even get through to 911, and no one shows up for an hour and a half, that's an unsafe condition.
That would, if that being said, the way you're presenting that, wouldn't that be the same case for everyone that lives in this town?
People who live in this town are familiar with that. I had a neighbor who was having a heart attack, and he had me driving to the hospital rather than call 911.
So, look, can I just ask you a question?
We live under those conditions. People who are from the outside who come here are not familiar with those
What does
conditions.
that have to do with the short-term rental?
Oh, I'll tell you what it has to do with it. Are you familiar with what Londonderry has done with respect to an ordinance on short-term rentals?
I think we've discussed different towns, but I can't tell you to the letter.
Here is a copy of what they have recently adopted. And I think you should study it because it talks about the balance of the interests of property owners and the residents of the town, and it sets forth regulations and requirements that reflect that balance. Nothing is ever perfect, but I looked at that, I think it's a pretty good ordinance. And I think before we even think about approving, changing the existing zoning, a precondition would be to have an ordinance that we know would be in effect.
I want to know what the voting public wants to do about, not just you, but I want to know if the voting public would like to have short-term rentals on our list of.
And I think before the voting public knows whether or not they want short-term rentals, they need to have some more understanding of what the implications of it are.
I'm not
what
willing
the
to write an
balance is
ordinance.
between the community and the property owners. And the third party of interest is the actual guests.
I understand all of that, and I agree with much of what you say, but my thoughts are that I would like to see if the voting public, if our voting public wants to have short-term rentals defined as we have it here in our conditional use. And I am not willing to do an ordinance without going to that voting public also.
Well, that's getting the cart well before the horse.
I
Because
disagree.
I cannot agree As a comparison, I cannot agree to buy a car until I know I see the car. I cannot agree to anything.
So then
without-
simply you would vote
without
no.
signing a blank check.
Then simply you would probably vote no. I mean, I'm not telling you how to vote, but wouldn't you just vote no on it? You have a vote, you have a say, so you would vote no.
This is also a public meeting in which we share information among each other.
Correct.
Right.
And opinions among each other. So I'm letting my opinion known, not only for my vote, but possibly to influence others who may be interested. Thank
And
you.
I appreciate that. I do appreciate that.
Sounds like Nancy Pelosi did. Sign the law and then you can read it later. That's what you're asking.
No, well, I don't,
The biggest problem, when they first came up with it and everybody was complaining about this, the only legal way to stop, you can't stop it, this is the person's property. But you can't put 20 people for a weekend in a place that's got 2 bedrooms.
I agree with that.
That has to be the first thing, that is control is.
So there are state regs, and I would encourage you to read the state regs as well before voting on whether or not
Can
you
you
want to
provide a
have
citation
this.
to the regulations so I could look it up?
Could I provide a
A
citation?
citation,
We've,
what the regulation number is.
we have provided that
look it up.
before at short-term rental discussions. And I understand, I hear you.
You tell me there's regulations, but I need to know what the
There's
regulations is.
state
so I can look it up.
regulations. Jonathan might be bringing you them.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
As a person that owns a property, is gonna produce work for people. Somebody's gonna plow the driveway, somebody's gonna mow the lawn, somebody's gonna clean the house. It's gonna produce work, something for people to do. A lot of people that live right down the street will do it, because they don't have to travel to go to work. But as long as the septic system's fine, I can't see any reason for somebody wanting to rent it, as long as he's keeping it within the limit of the septic system.
Right.
You know, so I think that's the only way you can illegally control it, is not putting 20 people in a 2-bedroom house.
Right. And I believe that is stated in, and I can't say this for sure, but I do believe that is stated in the state regs. that
Then
it
once
has
you've
to-
got people in there, you have to be able to know who the people are. Just like a motel, you have to sign the thing and write your license number down and stuff like that. This is all stuff you have to
But we
put
as
in
a
there
town.
before you ask the people if
but
they
we
want
as-
to do it.
We as a town, I know that Airbnb does require credit cards, it requires who you are, it requires where you're, I mean, there is a lot of regulations that go into renting these.
It has to be
through the-
enforced. It has to be enforced. There's a lot of bullshit goes on in this town. There's a law, but it's not enforced. There's no way to enforce it,
That's the biggest problem.
because we don't have anybody to do it.
I think,
Got a question or comment in the back.
Who enforces the state regulations? Anyone from the state?
The state themselves enforce
So
it.
how do they do that?
Well, the fire marshal is the fire,
Okay.
which is your compliance with your egress windows, your smoke detectors, your hardwired smoke detectors, carbon monoxide.
So if we don't know who has a short-term rental,
If there were a licensing fee, that would provide a budget for enforcement.
You have to.
then how could they
They want to
enforce
do
the
that.
regulations?
I'm sorry, I'm
Gene-
trying to hear you.
Gene
but
speaking.
These, I'm sorry, Gene.
How would the fire marshal enforce the regulations if we don't know who has the short-term rentals?
And that's why we're thinking about doing, that's why we're asking the voters, do they want to have, this is the first step, do you want to have short-term rental under conditional use? Because you have to take a first step, and this is the first step.
How will you present that? Will you educate everyone at the, obviously, not too many people have shown up here So I don't know how much interest.
This was supposed, to this, right, and that's a point right there that you're making, how much interest is in it.
So my question really is how will the voters that come to town meeting be educated on the pros and cons and what this actually means to all of us?
You know, we've put this all out there for everyone to be here to talk about. And you are the folks that showed up. Thank you for showing up, but you're the folks that showed up.
So, is this gonna
Mike.
go towards the town meeting, this town meeting, of the vote?
We're hoping.
Right.
Yeah. Right?
Yes.
I think, and I'm going to speak for myself, but this group of people, Susan absent tonight, we have had this particular question since the very first day that all of us sat down at a table together. And every single person in Andover has had an opinion on it and wanted us to do a lot of different things. And as we talked with attorneys about this, which we have, and we've talked with townspeople over and over about this, it became very clear to us that we needed to find that middle road where it's fair for everyone. Like you said, fair for the people who live here all the time and fair for the property owners who have a lot of rights as well. And so for us, the reason that we are saying we want to bring this to the vote is because if the town votes to put short-term rentals under that conditional use piece in the zoning, as we said, at that point, then as a select board, we can start to do things with Joe in order to come up with a way to, yes, make sure that we know who the owners are. They've got these, they've got what they're doing. I mean, there's a lot of things we can do once it's somewhere in our zoning. This is what this is about.
Property owners only have rights to use and enjoyment of their property within the confines of the existing zoning.
Right?
They don't have unfettered opportunity to use their properties any way they wish if they are in violation of the zoning.
Which is, you're proving my point, which is why I'm saying we're trying to have the public vote and say, yes, let's put short-term rentals under that conditional use so that then we can craft it in a way that's going to give us as much control as we can have legally.
What I'm saying, anyone who has acquired a property or put their property to a use which is in violation of the present zoning, they took a risk.
Renting your home is not in violation of the present zoning.
Oh,
Renting your home is not in
agree.
violation.
I agree.
So there's nothing there that says whether, let me finish, please, because.
We disagree on that. It becomes, I think our existing zoning does not permit unhosted short-term.
I think you would like that to be the case, and I understand that, or maybe that's the way you see it, but there is nothing in our zoning that says people cannot rent their properties.
Well, nobody's ever said that people cannot rent their properties.
And the time frame in which people can rent their properties, there's nothing that says that you can't rent your property for a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years, 10 years. So what we're trying to do is come up with a process in which we understand how these properties are being rented and the time frames and what that looks like. Because right now, there is nothing out there that tells us that we can't allow people to rent their properties or that we can allow them. And I personally, and I will say this, coming up to whether or not you decide to vote me in or out, that I believe that it isn't our right to tell people how they can rent their properties, but we do need to have some sort of regulation on that so that we can protect the people around them if things aren't going the way it should. With that said, we could have a neighbor that moves in and rents their property, or is a neighbor that just is an unruly neighbor, and whether they are a short-term renter or a person who lives in their own home, we still, as a select board, can't tell them what they can and cannot do unless it is an unregulated act that they're doing. That we aren't, I don't know, I can't tell my neighbor that they can't have a barbecue. I can't tell my neighbor that they can't stay up after midnight. I can't tell my neighbor, nor do I want to.
I can't tell my neighbor that he can't tune up his car in his driveway, but I can tell my neighbor that he cannot run for a business car repair in his driveway where he repairs cars for revenue for people who are bringing them there as a business.
Unless he has a conditional use permit.
If he has a conditional use permit,
that
he
is
can.
occasionally used for yourself.
But actually, if he had a conditional use permit to fix cars in his driveway for money, then yeah, he could.
Well, that's exactly the point, is that he can only do it with a conditional use permit.
Right, which
And
gives
you're
us,
asking
which would
you're
give us
asking
the power.
to whether or not we're willing to approve conditional use permits without knowing what the conditions are.
I am not willing to put conditions in until I find out whether the voters want to have a short-term rentals put under conditional use. I'm just not.
2 or 3 times in here over the years. And there's, we have no control over it. All I can do is evaluate what the property, my value is, the value of my house. And I get taxed every year for what my house is assessed for. So you go down and argue with him, and he says, well, there's another house on the other side of the hill, same house, and same money. And you want to sell it, which one's the guy going to buy? The one beside the junkyard or the one in a nice neighborhood? So they're going to say, well, you're going to buy that one. So you can always lower the price of your house. Exactly my argument.
We are off topic right now.
So that's, you know, this has happened already. It's happened 3 times. So you people just come and go on the last time, but I've fought this 3 times and had my property taxes.
What if
Andover's not responsible for my safety in my home.
Well, the renters may not agree. What if they sue us? What if somebody comes up here, has a stroke, they call 911, nobody shows up for 2 hours and they die?
Well,
And there is state sues us.
It's like in Vermont. Anybody else have?
In
the back. Gene.
Just asked Joe a question about the conditional use, which is something I didn't know. You said that once the conditional use is granted, that's it. It can never be removed. Where is that? Is that in the regulations and the zoning regulations?
Well, we have no, when we issue a permit, it does not come with a time limit. The conditional use permit attaches to the land.
So
It goes with the land. If the ownership of the land changes, the permit goes with the land to the new owner.
Would that mean then that if someone has a short-term rental and they sell it,
Yeah,
the next owners don't have to apply for a conditional use?
that's correct, yes. Right. It runs with the land. That's the difference between doing as I said before, the difference between doing a conditional use permit, which attaches to the land, and doing an ordinance, which is a permit that's issued to the owner itself. When the owner sells the property, it no longer exists. When it is a conditional use permit, it does exist with the new owner.
Yeah.
It seems like you have quite a few things that you consider when you write a conditional use permit. Couldn't one of those things that gets considered when you write the permit, that it gets written in there, that it needs to be renewed or looked at, or that you do put a deadline on it?
That would, in fact, I asked that question. And my advice was that if you put a limit on you could, I suppose, but then that would apply to all conditional use permits. It's all of them.
Retroactively?
No, not really but then it would become...
So we could see a way where you could say until such time as the property gets sold to a new owner.
Yeah.
Like
And-
a non-transferable clause, is that what we're talking about? Like it doesn't transfer?
Right,
So
so
I'm
that's,
just wondering if that's a
My advice
possibility.
to that, of that was, and I have, as I said, I asked that question, and the advice I got was that if you want to do that, you better have your attorney look at it and craft the language that would do that. And I'm not sure that you want to do that. That's one of the things I have not discussed with you, because I thought if we tried to do that, we would delay the process quite a bit. You would have, if we said to our attorney, we want to do a specific limitation on issuing a conditional use permit for short-term rentals, that would be a departure from what we have published in our zoning regulations. So that would involve some legalities, and I'm not sure. You could certainly do that.
yeah. So it's possible to have it written up so that one person, so in other words, if they sell it and then the new people buy it and they're going to use it for a short-term rental, we get the new people in and we have their information and they're now in the system. And I think that's a great idea,
Yeah.
obviously.
Well, it would be, the whole process of putting it or identifying it as a conditional use and requiring that all the existing ones apply for a permit
Right,
says very deliberately, we will have all of the information of how many there are,
right,
who owns it,
right,
what are the conditions in the building, what are the limitations,
right,
and our zoning regulations, as Jason read for you, have five very specific conditions that are applied to any of those applications. And the board, in fact, can add specific requirements,
right,
not involving changes in the law, of course,
right.
but we can apply some specific regulations or requirements that they have to be met. So,
I just did a quick search here on this exact subject we're talking about. There's 47 towns in Vermont that have the exact same question on the town ballot. This,
Yeah, should we put this under, right,
exactly. Is that-
47
does it
other
run with the
towns.
land or not?
Yeah.
So it's
47
something
towns have
that's
what?
being done.
47 towns are doing the exact same thing that we're talking about here tonight, which is
Yeah.
put on the ballot to put this under the
Sure.
conditional use. 47, thank you, sir.
No problem.
I think there's two ways.
This is why we're here doing this.
Yeah.
We're just figuring it out.
Yeah.
But first, we gotta get the town to say, yeah, we want that as an ordinance, which is really important thing to do.
We have to take a first step.
First step.
It's not necessarily the last step, but it's the first step.
It's the
Because
first
there's
step.
no step yet, and nothing is conforming at the moment. There's no definition. There's,
The town we're going to put this on the ballot, and yes, we will answer questions as much as we can on that day, but we want people to say to us, yes, we have voted and the majority of Andover wants us to put it together under the conditional use in our zoning. Now, at that point, all of those details can be hammered out and shared before anything happens in concrete. But first, we have to be told, yes, this is what you should do.
Right.
And that's all we're doing here tonight, is just saying, and wanting for you to say what you think about that.
There'll be an article on the bill at the town meeting.
It will.
Yes.
That's fine.
Yep.
I think there's two ways to look at the fact that the regulations go with the land is,
Well, not knowing this is.
hold on.
Hold on, Chris is speaking.
So you'll have.
Hold on, Chris.
Chris is speaking. Please allow him to speak.
you can look at it two ways. One says it's permanent because it's a conditional use that goes with the land, but the other half is it will forever have those conditions on it, regardless who owns it.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
There's two ways you can look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's wonderful.
So if if you give a conditional use and the town decides that this is what the town wants, to put the short-term rentals under the conditional use umbrella. Joe, you say it goes to the property. Would that mean that I have 16 acres? Can I put a second home up that's also a short-term rental?
Well, then you need another permit.
Why? Because it goes to
Well,
the property.
if you have 16 acres and you have one house on it,
Have a subdivision.
you can build another half or another house for just one house in addition to the one you already have. That's part of the zoning ordinance. But if you want to put more than that, then you need to first of all subdivide the property and then get a permit.
So,
And that
so the
falls
answer
under-
is yes, that if there's only one additional house on my property,
Mhm.
that it would also be under the umbrella of the conditional use for the property.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, if you build another house,
Joe, if the use changes, if somebody lets the conditional use go, then doesn't rent for 2 years, then the condition drops, right?
well, if, the thing is, if the property changes hands and the new owner doesn't do a short-term rentals,
Right.
he still has a permit. He's just not using it. It does not ever disappear.
Yeah.
It rides with the land because it's a conditional use permit that runs with the land. If you did an ordinance and said, we will issue a permit for short-term rentals to the owner, then it only runs with the owner. As long as the owner owns that, he can do that. But if he disappears, the permit disappears. And it's not the case with a conditional use permit.
Have any other questions? Somebody that hasn't spoken?
Well, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you for your insight, Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Anybody else want to talk? Let's adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thanks. Thank you for coming, sir. Yes.
Yes, no obligation, yeah. Are you getting ready? Good to see you.
Is the meeting over? Have we
Yeah, it's
called
just,
it?
Okay.
it was, it's
Well-
not like I was asked, so I said, okay.
I just don't want to get up and leave.
Middle of the night, you gotta come down.
You can go now.